I'm not going to screw up and sew the fabrics on wrong. I'm not going to screw up and sew the fabrics on wrong. Oh crap, I sewed it on wrong. Yep, that was week 10 when we were sewing the Dutchman's puzzle. I made a mistake and sewed the fabric on wrong. But that mistake was the inspiration for this week's Chevron Block. Let's get started. To make this block, you're going to need some rectangles that are 2.5 by 4.5 inches wide. And you're going to need 8 of these. And you're going to need a total of 16 2.5-inch squares. Now, they don't necessarily have to be the same color, but for this week's video, I'm just going to make them the same color. With these 2.5-inch squares, what you might want to do is you can either draw the diagonal line on the back of the fabric, or do what I did here and iron them in half diagonally. When we go to the sewing machine, we're going to actually be stitching right on this line here. So when you line it up with the rectangles, you'll line it up and you'll sew right on that ironed diagonal line. This is where I'm going to warn you about the direction as to how you place, or the direction in terms of where you place these triangles, because in the Dutchman's puzzle that we previously did, you made flying geese units in which each of the direction that you sew your seam is going from one corner to the middle, then from the middle to the opposite corner. What I mistakenly did was I actually sewed it, or I actually made a unit that looked like this, in which I couldn't use it for the Dutchman's puzzle because it's a totally different unit. But for this block, we're going to use it. So you'll be making four units that look like this. Then you're also going to be making 4 units that are the mirror image of it. So 4 of these and 4 of these, so that, let me turn it vertically, when you sew them together, you get that chevron pattern. So let's take these to the sewing machine and let's get these units sewed up. So I sewed 4 units that look like this. Now I'm going to sew the 4 units that have the triangle going to the upper left corner. One thing I should mention is that when you sew, okay, let me actually mark the diagonal line here so that you can actually see what I'm talking about here. So let me just kind of quickly make this diagonal line. Now, if you don't want to iron this diagonal sew line, you can very well just do mark it, just like how I did. But one thing I do want to point out is that when you sew, or when you do sew this, okay, now after I'm done sewing, I'm actually going to press the seam allowance, or press the triangle toward the corner. When you do this, you just first of all want to make sure that the point here matches up to the point on the background fabric. If somehow you're coming up a couple of threads short, here's a tip that a lot of people do, is instead of sewing right on that diagonal line, sew a little off towards the corner towards the direction where you're going to flip the fabrics over. So instead of going right on the diagonal line, I'll sew maybe a thread or 2 just inside of that, so that when I flip it over, hopefully the corner of this orange fabric will meet up with the corner of this purple, or the purple background. So just a little tip as to when you use this technique. So I got 4 units where the triangle is sewn to the upper right corner and 4 units where the triangle is sewn to the upper left corner. Now, in order to make things less confusing, I'm actually going to just lay out the blocks this way so that, because I don't want to then get these confused, I'm going to make sure that all of these go like that and all of these get sewn like that. Okay, so do what you got to do to make sure that you don't sew the triangles on the wrong way. So I'm going to push these aside for a second and I'm only going to work on these. Okay, so is that right? Let's make sure. Yep, I want to sew it like that. Yes. Okay, and then we'll line up the fabric. Okay, so I got 4 units where this orange triangle is sewn to the bottom left and the upper right corner. And I have 4 units where the orange triangle is sewn to the upper left corner and the bottom right. Now again, when we sew these blocks together, it'll give us that chevron effect. But before we do that, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually make sure that the block, or that this point here on the orange fabric will actually line up with the point of the purple fabric, or the background, or the rectangle fabrics. Okay, so just making sure that that looks good. Okay, this one is kind of off, and it might just be how I finger pressed it. And that actually looks a little better. Let's see. Yeah, that's actually pretty good. So that's good. So we're going to check with all of these. So on this particular block, the orange fabric actually meets up with the purple rectangle fabric in that point, but there's a sliver of fabric that sticks out here, and this is actually from me pressing the fabric incorrectly. I'm not going to sweat something like that, or I'm not going to really care about that, because what's going to happen is we're going to be trimming that part off. So as long as your point meets to the background fabric, if there's extra, or if you got extra trimmings here, don't worry about that. Okay, so let's start trimming away. So I'm gonna grab a ruler and we're gonna trim 1/4 inch away from that sewn diagonal seam. And with these extra pieces here, you can actually, well, you're going to see me sewing them together because we're going to make 1 inch half square triangles. Or you can also just throw them in your crumb bin and just save it for a rainy day project. But I'm actually going to make a half square triangle out of this. So you'll see me sewing these in between some of these blocks. But let's get all these other blocks cut off. So if you don't want to take the time of actually rotary cutting or getting your ruler and cutting it like how I am here, whoops. And I just totally butchered that little triangle, so this is going to go in a crumb bin. But if you don't want to use your rotary cutter to cut off the excess there, what you can do is you can just grab your scissors and just trim an approximate 1/4 inch. It does not have to be exact, because this piece here, I mean, you already sewn your seam diagonally here. So this 1/4 inch seam is not a big deal. In fact, a lot of times, and I think I've mentioned this in the Dutchman's puzzle video, if I'm in a rush, I'll just do this. And even though I didn't trim it very straight there, I'll just leave it. And the seam allowance is way bigger than a 1/4 inch here, but it doesn't really matter because again, it is the seam allowance and you already have your seam sewn onto the block. So we're gonna trim the rest of these blocks down and we'll get the seams, or we'll get the block pressed as well. You know, one thing about quilting is that just by turning or sewing the seam in a different direction, you know, there's a number of different things that you can do just with that slight change and you get a totally different looking block. And so this was actually a happy, well, the mistake that I made when we were making the Dutchman's puzzle and doing all of those flying geese units kind of just reminded me of the fact that, hey, sometimes you might sew something on wrong and you might think that you'd be making a mistake, but in actuality, that mistake can lead to a discovery as to how to make something different or how to make something new. And just by even doing something as simple as laying out the block incorrectly, you might, or laying out the block a little differently, you might actually discover something new in which you might, I don't know, create a whole new quilt block. And so this particular block, yeah, it lends itself to actually doing something like that. In the Dutchman's puzzle video, because I sewed my seam on wrong, I discovered, hey, I can make a chevron block just by doing this too. So for the sake of the newer quilters, or if you're just beginning to learn about quilting, you know, just by changing the layout of the block in terms of how you put it together can actually give you a whole different look. And so before we actually put this particular block together, I'll show you what else, or I'll show you different ways as to how you can lay it out, and that'll give you an idea of what I'm trying to convey to you. So let's get these blocks pressed. Let's get moving on. Okay, so because of the fact that I, instead of drawing the diagonal line, I actually pressed down or ironed that diagonal line, these blocks are actually kind of flat, but they're still kind of popping up a little bit, so I'm not gonna have that difficult of a time actually pressing them down. I'm just gonna press it down and they're gonna end up being really flat here. And I'm just gonna lay them on top of each other actually. I'm not going to use my composition book to iron it flat because again, these blocks are pretty flat, but I am going to kind of separate them out just to make sure that I get the correct orientation on each of these. So put it back to how it was. Okay, so again, we got 4 units of this, 4 units of these, and so let's start laying them out. Now, in order to actually achieve that chevron look, you basically take 1 unit from each of those stacks, put them together. So here I got 2 units of the same and 2 units of the other, or the mirror image. Then I can also do 2 units, or basically put the block, use the rest of the units to make, whoops, wrong side. There we go. So there is the entire chevron. So there's your entire chevron here. Now, what if, and this is what I was kind of mentioning, what if we actually change the layout of it a little bit? So you see here, I'm just swapping the block around. It'll give you a totally different look. Or I could flip this. Oh no, that'll be a chevron. That's a little bit of a different block, because you do have the chevron pattern here, but you're going to get a different effect. You could also do that. You could also, let's see, what other layouts can we think of? What if I put the layout and face all of these blocks the same way? Nope, nope. This one. And then this one. Nope. No, where is it? This one, here. This could be a block. And then I could make another block with the direction going the opposite way, which will give you a very interesting look. Or what if, instead of making a block like this, look what happens when I start laying them lengthwise next to each other. Or, whoops, nope, not that way. I could do this. That looks pretty cool, like a stripe effect. I could also do this. Nope, that one. Okay, this would actually make a pretty cool sashing. So you got different options. You don't necessarily have to do, or for the sake of this week's block, we're gonna lay it out this way in order to make the chevron. Look at this. I could also do this, where the points actually meet each other. And you get a secondary pattern with this square here in the middle. But again, this week we're making a chevron, but you kind of get the idea that just by simply turning or laying out the blocks or the units a little differently, you can get a totally different quilt block. So play around with this, because you don't necessarily have to make a chevron unit. It's your quilt, so you can do whatever you want to, but just experiment with the different layouts that you can do and come up with something that you want on your quilt. You don't necessarily have to do it exactly like how I'm doing it. I am giving you permission to just lay out this block the way you want it. So let's go to the sewing machine and let's get this chevron block sewn together. And here is my chevron block. Now, the block in total is supposed to measure 8.5 inches, but when it came to the length of it, I was about a 1/4 inch short. Am I gonna worry about that? Definitely not. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video in making the chevron block, and I hope I gave you some tips and ideas as to how you can lay the block out differently. Again, it's your choice. It's your quilt. You don't have to follow my block or do the exact same block as I'm doing. You can make it up, and I give you permission to make up your own block in this case. I hope you like this video, and until next week, go out and create something. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications on when I upload the next video. Put a comment down below saying what you liked or maybe even what you didn't like. And join the Facebook discussion group at Treasure Heart Creations. You can post pictures of the blocks that you created or just scroll through and gather inspiration from other Treasure Heart Creation Group members. And from time to time, there are giveaways exclusively for Treasure Heart Creation Group members. So use the link in the description box below to sign up. If you're on Instagram, post pictures of the blocks that you're working on using the hashtag THC5252. Well, that's it for now. Now go out and create something.